Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Shannen Doherty.
Hello.
And Lloyd Williams-Jones.
Hello there.
How's it going, guys? You all right?
Yeah, very well, thanks.
Very good, thank you.
This feels fun with this makeshift mic here.
In person.
I love this, and actually you can just hold it for me. This makes it much easier.
I'm Mike Man.
We've tried this a few times. Hopefully this one works, because the last time, remember, it was Christmas and the sound was too echoey, but I've got a new microphone. We're going to talk about inclusive by design. We're going to reflect on what the paper from Josh Goodrich, Jen Barker and Peps McRae might mean in action. A few things to cover in any other business. First of all, congratulations, both of you. Shannen, you're going to be deputy head teacher next year.
I'm going to be deputy head teacher next year at Skinner's Temple Grove in Tunbridge Wells. It's a school that is on a little bit of a journey. It's very exciting. I could be leading on teaching and learning and curriculum, coaching ECTs, assessment, all of my favourite things. Very excited, thank you.
Fantastic. And Lloyd, you're going into headship.
Yes, I am, for my sins. Congratulations to Shannen as well, first on her post. Is very deserved, and I know she'll be excellent in the role. Going into take on the headship at Tiger Primary School, which is part of the Future Schools Trust in Maidstone. Some challenges, some things to take on. Been a bit of turbulence. Some schools had some challenges and things over the last couple of years. So really excited to get in and be part of that community, really.
Yeah, but I mean, you want to make your mark on a school, don't you? You don't want to just take over a school that's ticking along nicely, do you? You know, because that's not where the reward comes from, I don't think. And also, congratulations on 100 cycles in 100 days. I mean, listeners or / viewers of the podcast won't recognise you. I mean, congratulations, mate. Massive.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a bit of a personal sort of goal that I essentially my wife and Shannon's wife, Neil Almond, friend of the show, are quite locked in into training for a triathlon, and I got very jealous. So I kind of set myself my own little goal of trying to do something sort of me against me, if you will. Finished that yesterday. So it was good. It's good. And I probably don't recognise me. I'm sort of a little bit different.
No, it's massive. Yeah, hugely inspirational. I mean, I'm by the time this episode goes out, 6 weeks off cigarettes, and definitely part of that has been your inspiration in terms of making a massive change in your approach to life and stuff. Making time for you is huge.
We also are very proud of Max.
Well, we'll see. I could have relapsed by the time this comes out.
No, you won't, because you've said it now, and it's very exciting. So congratulations to you, and congratulations to you doubly. And I am just working on getting through each day. So for anyone out there who isn't
That's acceptable.
training for a triathlon or giving up cigarettes or cycling 100 days in a row, you're with me.
So last week's episode, you guys have had a chance to reflect on it. I mentioned, partly to celebrate, but also because I think it's really important, because you're both going into situations where this paper, thinking about our provision for SEND in schools at a time of immense difficulty and challenge, it will be really, really important. So what were your initial thoughts upon reading the discussion paper?
Well, firstly, that it was a zinger. There's papers that come out from time to time, and there's bits and pieces that drop, and every now and again, was it a thunderbolt? Was we were way back at the inception of the show?
The classics.
I feel like this is a bit of a thunderbolt. I really do. This sat me right up in my chair when I thought, that's interesting. Like a paper on SEND, because has affected me so greatly as a leader in the past 5 years, particularly being in Kent, that I was like, I really sat up just at the title and then I read it and was like, oh my, this is a real shots fired sort of paper. That's how I felt. And but in a really professional way. I feel like it, and we'll unpack it, I'm sure, but it really went to places and said things that everybody was thinking but hasn't been said, and I feel like that needed to happen, like from both angles, from a systemic kind of governmental level, also on a kind of sort of micro classroom level as well. It went to both places, and I feel that much credit to Jen and Peps and for that, you know, and Josh as well, for their contributions to that paper, because I feel like it's needed, and I feel like we need to talk about it more. What were your thoughts, Sean?
Yeah, because I mean, Peps' email from his evidence snacks dropped at 7 o'clock on a Thursday morning, and you had messaged me by 7:05, and I'd emailed Peps by 7:30 said, Lloyd's been on the blower. He wants us to talk about this on on the podcast, and he's all anything for Lloyd.
Oh, bless him.
That's very sweet. I kind of echo what Lloyd has already said. I think I found it really refreshing that people were able to kind of articulate what I think a lot of people have been thinking and talking about for a while, and sort of validating a lot of the challenges that we face day to day in schools, particularly schools that have a high number of pupils who are identified as having SEND. I think I liked the fact that it wasn't like purely theory and it wasn't purely practical. It hit the balance really nicely. I wrote down a few things that kind of really resonated with me, sort of like the shift from it being about the individual to the universal design. And Lloyd and I talked in the car on the way here. We were trying to save it for the pod, but, you know, we were excited. But just that shift from going, actually, universal provision is your priority as a teacher, and not always focusing about that individual need. Thinking about empowering teachers to be the person who knows their pupils and knows what their pupils need, rather than relying on a kind of external agencies, which I think has been a bit of kind of a fallback for some teachers. Also that critique of like label chasing, and actually it's not the label that's the most important thing, and I think lots of us probably know it, but when you've got parents and pressures from them, or you've got a Senko who maybe is pushing for a label, or you yourself might think that's the best thing for the child, I'll go for a label, it's not the right thing necessarily all the time. And kind of taking down some of those barriers and those things that people aren't the most confident in when it comes to SEND, and just thinking, you are the teacher, you know your pupils, think about teaching all of them really, really well, and those children are going to do okay.
Yeah, it was very much nod along and go, oh, actually, they put a name to lots of the things that we've been thinking and the way we've been behaving in schools and stuff. And I think in particular, Jen going the extra mile in terms of finding the evidence base and seeing what exists and what doesn't exist. Because we can't all thousands of us can't do that individually. But here we have a paper that says, actually, this is how we might take some control in a situation that seems like it's spiraling constantly. And we're still waiting on sort of governmental direction. I know there's been a promise of funding and things like that, but to TBC, you know, without being overly critical of them at the minute.
Yeah, I think there is significant challenge around SEND, and there has been for the last decade, and I feel we've, you know, without sort of getting political, you know, it's very hard to do on this topic. We simply haven't addressed the systemic problems, and I think the paper really crystallizes the issues at a really high level, like in terms of those levers that we can pull then towards correcting it. But it's going to take time, you know, and I'm sure we'll talk specifically about, you know, our settings and our current sort of climate in Kent at the moment, which is very, very challenging on the ground. But the bottom line is, you know, they talked about upstream and downstream. I thought it was a really, really smart way of talking about it. But the bottom line is, on the ground for leaders and teachers, it's really hard at the moment. It's really, really challenging, and it's getting harder. So there has to be some significant shift towards this. Otherwise, you know, we're going to end up continuing to drive people out of the profession, you know, and we're working hard to do the opposite of that, because this is a noble profession. This is a profession we want people to come into. But these are the things, you know, that really weigh on teachers when they don't have the right expertise or support and structures and mechanisms around them to be able to maximise their efficiency, and to be able to not just cope with SEND, because it's not about coping with SEND. It's about like excelling. It's about progress. It's about them getting the right deal, not just about coping. And I feel like we're in a coping climate, like, and we have been for a while.
I think also if we kind of speak about that shift that you talked about that needs to happen, I don't know how to make it happen, but I feel like this should be compulsory reading for all school improvement kind of people in local authorities, in trusts, Ofsted inspectors, anyone who is going into schools and either kind of critiquing or supporting, anyone who is meant to know what they're doing and going in, because I do think there are schools who have been trying to work this way for a while. There will definitely be pockets of really good practice, but maybe the experts who come in don't kind of give it the green flag it needs, and so they feel a bit disempowered. And I think it needs people going in and saying, actually, no, this is the right thing. We're all going to work towards this together. Yes, it's going to be a slog. It is really ambitious that we all work this way. Oh, it should be ambitious because we should be making better moves and we should be making changes. But it takes everyone being on board, because it's really hard when you're that school leader or that teacher, that Senko, whoever you are, battling against people saying, well, where's the differentiation? Why, you've got X number of children with SEND. What's the provision for your SEND children? And if you're saying, but it's really highly effective teaching, and they say, well, I need to see something, you're fighting a losing battle, and it's really exhausting being that person. And I think in some cases you kind of go, right, okay, we'll just do what they're saying then, because they're meant to be the expert. So I think it takes everyone involved, all kind of stakeholders, like governors even, like everyone knowing this is the way forward and there is a reason for it and there is the evidence base for it. And that's a hard conversation to have, which I think is why like this feels incredible and it feels powerful, but it's going to be very much like an uphill climb.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm probably going to misattribute and misquote, but someone said, like, it's almost like there's an industry built around this deficit model that we've got. You know, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for calling it the SEND industrial complex, but like there are so many sort of businesses invested in that being the way we approach these things, that actually if you give control back to teachers and back to schools, then that almost becomes surplus to requirements and stuff. And so that's why, you know, that point about everyone reading this, even if they do read it, I'm not convinced that everyone will get on board with it, because there are too many vested interests. When really, you know, I think, I can't remember. I can't remember where I saw it. I don't think it was in the report, but it really stood out to me, like almost like there is a whole system built around the idea that we have to individualize things and we have to do additional stuff, when really it's the high quality teaching. I mean, that was the dyscalculia point I made. You know, we really don't know enough about it, and we don't know enough about the quality of teaching to make those kinds of judgments and things. For lots of schools, the provision of challenge and depth in primary mathematics is always a burning question, something that's always on teachers' minds, always on subject leaders' minds. And it's something that I'm going to explore in a series of workshops around the UK, starting with 3 in October and November. So in London, we're going to be in Camden on the 13th of October. We're going to be in Coventry on the 22nd of October. And then on the 7th of November, we're going to be in Oldham in the Greater Manchester area, exploring challenge and depth in primary mathematics, how we can take children from noticing patterns to mathematical proof, everything in between, so that our questioning, our task design are set up in such a way that our students are really thinking deeply about the mathematics that they encounter, and so we can go deeper without having to accelerate children on unnecessarily. I'll make sure there's a link in the description, but tickets are on sale now for all 3 of those dates, and they're the first 3 in a tour that's likely to go on across 2026 as well. So without further ado, back to the episode. What will it mean for you in your new role? And what will the next 12 months look like, if anything?
I think it means that we need to remind everyone that inclusion and SEND is everyone's business. I think a big part of the next year will be laying the groundwork and getting everyone on board. Almost like a few years ago when we were thinking more about pedagogy and like intentional pedagogy, we had to do a bit of a process of everyone needs to know how children learn or how people learn and how memory works, and everyone needs to read Rose and Shannen, and everyone needs to get a basic understanding of where we're starting. I think there's going to be a bit of work that's like preparing the ground for us to plant the seeds, because I don't think if we go in all guns blazing, something will fall, something will drop, or something be misunderstood, miscommunicated, and it could go very wrong. And so it's one of those occasions, I think, where you want to be really kind of proactive and go, yeah, we're going to throw everything out, we're going to start again. And you just need to take a step, I think, and go, hold on, what's the first step here? And it probably is going, everyone read this, let's understand it, let's talk about it at length, rather than going, this is how we do things now, because you'll lose people along the way. So I think I want to say we'll be doing loads of exciting things with it, but I think we have to shift everyone's understanding first and foremost. And then there are obviously things that we can crack on with later on in the year. And there'll be teachers who read this or take part in those conversations who start adapting their practice and start, bringing these principles into their day-to-day teaching anyway, which are great. But I think if you're thinking school-wide, trust-wide, there's a lot of work to be done on getting everyone on board initially. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly from my perspective, going in as a head, it starts from the top. Culture starts from the top, right? And and us as leaders, we set the tone for culture around SEND, and SEND should run through the school like a stick of rock, and it should be completely entwined in everything and all decisions you made. Senkos, our senior leaders, should sit around SLT tables. They don't in all schools. There are some schools where they're not, which I can't quite understand myself, because how integral they are to ensuring that, like you say, that early identification processing. For our local context, the challenges around funding for us, there's a significant shift in Kent at the moment where, similar to, I think it's Bradford, have the same model, like the communities, localities model, where funding is distributed by small clusters of schools. It's all new to Kent, and it's rocky. We've had, historically, Kent has had a difficult time with SEND, particularly compared to other local authorities as well. So the landscape's really challenging, and the DFE were involved last year in terms of supporting the county. But the bottom line, and I think that, calling back to the episode, they talked about that culture, that culture, and this is exactly what Shannen's saying, it has to come from the very top. It has to come from the very beginning of setting your stall out and about what you do, and everything you do is rooted in it. And so in terms of the implications from my perspective, going to my context, and I'm sure this is probably similar to others, it's about that building, like you said, building on work that's already been done, because it's not like schools haven't done anything towards this. With like say, there's lots of excellent schools with excellent practice. You need to look at OCMAT and Cassie and the work they do across trust level with SEND is astonishing, and the stuff she's put out in their blogs lately has just been incredible, and the way they work, brilliant, really inspiring. So it's about how you champion it, and you make sure that you do everything you can to ensure that the professional learning of staff, the CPD, is again long and thin around SEND, is continually revisited. It's not just, we've done adaptive teaching for a term, so we'll pick that back up next year. It's got to be drip fed across all the time. It's got to be talked about at pupil progress meetings. It's got to be talked about at briefings. It's got to be part of it, what everybody does. And I think one thing I will say, which is really a really useful thing for Kent, is Kent produced something called the Mainstream Core Standards, which is, and I have mentioned it before on the podcast, but I'll call back to it because it's actually an excellent document. It's actually a really excellent document that not many other local authorities have, and I will say Kent have done a great job with that in terms of codifying what universal access looks like for children and what everyone should have. All right, it's not perfect. There'll be things in there that you could probably argue about, but as a rule of thumb, that document, if you follow that document and you take into account what it says, you'd be doing a good job for your children. And I feel like it's about constantly coming back to that document and referring to practice and auditing your practice all the time, because we know what it's like, you know, it's that constant drip, check, you know, coaching, how we make sure that people are still, you know, working on those principles all the time in their teaching. So for me, yeah, coming back to that document probably, whilst also acknowledging the work that's already been done, and rooting the school in the culture of SEND and the culture of high expectation and inclusive teaching for all, and making sure that everybody has access to the right intervention, not the intervention that's been stipulated because someone wants to see something. Like you said, that's a really good point.
I think also, I think you said making sure that, you know, people understand that inclusive teaching is for everyone, and that's kind of the root of what we're doing, and understanding that it will benefit all pupils. You know, inclusive teaching benefits all pupils. It's not about saying and I hate that I'm using this phrase, but I think it's a phrase that some people will be using, that you're almost dumbing down your teaching. But it's not that. And I think there'll be people who go, but if we do that, what about these children? And I've worked in schools where teachers have sort of gone, well, if I focus on this end, what about my tops? And there's a huge shift to make in so many different ways, which is why you can't run into this too fast, I don't think. I think we need to have an understanding that inclusive teaching benefits all pupils, and that this is what our universal provision should be at the end of the day. But I think if there are people who are saying, right, we get that, our staff get it, what can we do? And you want to do something, like some practical kind of pedagogical steps in the right direction. Things like having a whole school focus on something like checking for understanding. That's something that everyone can do now, regardless of whether or not you've got the right culture for SEND, because you should be doing that anyway. But if you're in a school where you're saying, actually, we're in a decent position, we've done a bit of work on SEND, our teachers really get this stuff, we are ready for it. Things like checking for understanding, that is going to be like one of the biggest kind of strategies, techniques you can use to make sure that your teachers are as proactive and responsive as possible, and really meeting the needs of all their pupils. And I mean all their pupils. And I think if you are looking for something to work on, it's like, I don't know, a pedagogical kind of technique, or something you need to think about when you're thinking about coaching, or kind of rehearsal in CPD, then something like that, practicing methods for checking for understanding, is probably going to be your first step, I would say. And it's something that my head and I have been thinking about. You know, we've caught up in the last couple of weeks about where we're going, what we're going to be focusing on. We've got an idea of things that we think we might look at. Checking for understanding was up there at the top of the list, you know, and we are going to go around, and, you know, I'm new to the school, so I need to understand what everyone is like, and I need to get kind of that understanding of what the kind of teaching and learning culture is like and the practice is like. But spending your time thinking about something like checking for understanding is never going to be a bad thing. So if you are either in a school where you've got the understanding sorted, or you're in a school where someone is saying to you, you need to be teaching teachers how to do something, that's, I think, your first port of call. That is something that you could work on in the next year without kind of interrupting the sensible implementation of this paper.
Yeah, it's so high leverage, because even if it's the only thing you're doing really well, having routines in place and systems in place for taking in as much information as possible and then acting on that information is already more effective than most, you know, certainly if I think about myself, first 5 odd years of my career, more effective than that person, you know. And it's normally, whenever I'm working with schools, normally the first thing we do is we put these systems in place. Okay, here's a routine. If you do this routine, then you can flourish as a teacher. And the fact that it builds into this model that the paper sort of suggesting, you know, I think makes total sense. So I think it's I like the idea of prudence. I think it's different as a deputy, because your head teacher has done almost the sit back and look, and then you've got that sort of slip road into let's make change. Whereas Lloyd, you've been obviously doing days, but you may have a little bit of watching to do. I don't know, is that the reality that you're going into, or do you think you've got a handle on things that are happening?
No, you're absolutely right. there's definitely a degree for me of just kind of observing and kind of getting a feel for practice and where we're at as a school. I know that Tiger have done a lot of work this year on adaptive teaching, which is great because like we said there, that's, you know, that work's already been laid down. But I think, you know, getting a feel for the temperature of your staff and how they feel about and kind of what their views are on SEND, and we spoke about this previously, Shannen and I, in terms of it's elephant in the room, right? But like in terms of how there is some legacy thinking out there, some hangover thinking of days past where if a child has a certain amount of complex need, well then, and if they have been assigned a one-to-one, for example, through high needs funding, whatever it is, then that's what happens. They scream. No. If they have been, you know, assigned a one-to-one, then there's a you know, and I've certainly experienced this in my career. In my opinion, there have been certain teachers that have just disengaged and have gone, well, that's the Senko's problem. It's not my problem, and or they've doubled down into some like mad version of differentiation, which is so far from anything, and like Peps and Jen talking about, so like diluted from, and Chris talked about it as well. It's diluted from actually what is addressing the problem that they're like learning to read and early reading and early maths acquisition and stuff. That actually it's just you might as well just be putting them in the corridor, you know, like so. I do think there's that's still that's still something as leaders we've got to get into the skin of and root out and really challenge, because that's not fair. What I will say is, in the same breath, if a teacher's in a school where the mechanisms and systems and structures and support and expertise and training isn't there, I can see why they do that, because how the hell are you supposed to solve that? Like, you know, here's a massively complex learning situation and 29 other children to deal with. Solve it, you know, and that's really not fair on those teachers either. So I'm not saying I'm putting blame solely on them, but it's certainly something that looms large, I think, in schools.
Yeah, I think it's right that we do acknowledge that sort of elephant in the room of there are some people, for whatever reason they've got there, whatever their experience is, they think that it's either not their job or it's too much of an issue, like too big of an issue for them to be able to tackle. And those people exist, those schools exist. You know, we have to be realistic. If we're going to think about how we can genuinely put this paper into practice and make it what it should be for those children, you have to acknowledge that there is some poor practice, whether that's poor practice by choice or poor practice by circumstance. We have to call it what it is and say, actually, it's everyone's job. We all need to get on board with it, and acknowledge that if you are trying to differentiate and provide an individual kind of curriculum or provision for every pupil in your class that has been identified as having SEND, you are diluting the provision of the children that genuinely do need that additional to and different from practice, because you're stretched too thin. So if you can make sure that the majority of your pupils with SEND benefit from your highly effective, inclusive teaching, then that means that you have got more breathing space and capacity to then think about those pupils who have got a need significant enough that warrants that difference, I think. But it's a hard conversation to have, and it's a hard conversation to why does that child get something when this child doesn't, and there's parental pressures and there's pressures from everywhere, and there's people from external agencies coming in saying this child needs XYZ, or they might have a report from an EP that says they'd benefit from this, or a child with an EHCP might have something recommended that you are bending over backwards to try and provide but isn't actually practically realistic for your school. And you could do something else just as beneficial, if not more so. It's really tough and it's really complex, and there is a reason that we haven't cracked it as a profession yet, because it is tough. But I do think this is the first step in that, is acknowledging that inclusive teaching is universally beneficial to all pupils, and it doesn't need to be lots and lots of different practice and provision. You can impact the learning of every child by doing really good teaching, which might look a certain way, might have certain elements to it, you might be using certain strategies, but if it's benefiting everyone, then you just need to crack on, don't you? We're a profession that presumably cares deeply about children's learning and about their futures. That's why I'm assuming most of us got into the job, not just for holidays, not for the pay. We got into it because we want to make a difference, and this is the right step, is a step in the right direction. We need to just get on with it and have those hard conversations, acknowledge the kind of elephants in the room, and then move forward.
Yeah, I went to visit Liv Dempsey in Farnborough, and I think my interpretation of her first year in headship is that she has essentially addressed legacy thinking with regards to SEND behaviour and really laid the foundations for success. So I said, I really wanted to chat with her about what she did over that first year, because I think her experience over the last year, if you guys are looking for someone who has been through that recently in a new role, someone to go to, because like I say, the more examples we have of that, the better equipped I think we'll be.
Yeah, I think just to speak on that briefly, I think undoing that legacy thinking when you are new somewhere is a lot easier, and we're both coming into new places, so we are that kind of fresh pair of eyes, and kind of we can shake things up a bit more. If you are somewhere where you as a leader have led people down that path and you're now going, that's not the right thing, I shouldn't have done that, I think it's really hard to undo it when you're in that place. And I've certainly worked in schools where there's been kind of that culture of the SEND children, kind of, you've got that box on your planning format, which hopefully no one has anymore, but certainly did when I started teaching. Well, what will my SENDs do? What will the SENDs do? Because they're clearly one homogenous blob. And that's what people are facing in some schools at the moment. And if you're a leader who's read this paper or listening to these podcast episodes and you're going, yeah, no, that's not the right thing, we do need to change the way we're doing it, it's quite hard for you to hold your hands up and say, we got this wrong and we need to work on this. And then even harder if you're a teacher in a school where your leaders aren't kind of in line with what this paper suggests, and you're trying to fight that battle. That's really tough. And I've certainly been one of a few teachers in a school where I've been saying, I don't think we should be just calling them the SENDs, and I don't think we should be kind of referring to them like that. And it's really hard. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that as well, because we're talking about this in action and in practice. So we have to acknowledge that there are real challenges ahead for anyone who wants to do this well.
We were all reminiscent about the time when you had to have the pupil characteristics on their desk so that inspectors could see. And someone said that they've seen that happening recently. So I reckon it's, and I don't think it's people who are listening to podcasts about education who are leading schools where that stuff is prevalent, but, it's 2003 in lots of places still. We definitely live in a bubble, and that bubble just gets smaller and smaller with the sort of reduction in social media options, so it's I think that's a very, very important point, Shannen, because the labels we use, the way we describe situations, I think that's almost like the first step to acknowledging that we need to do things differently, and then and almost like a constant reminder, that this is something, should always be on our minds. We've almost started feeding into the next question. Are the implications different from what they might have been in your previous, more established roles? And you were both in slightly different situations, because Shannen, you were in a multi-academy trust. Lloyd, you were in a locally maintained school. Do you think, like, for instance, I'm thinking of Jack, who will take you on your role, will his experience be different? I'm not sure who will take on your role, but there may be some bigger thinking there, Shannen. Is it going to be different? And if so, how?
I think for me it will be different because my role was as the teacher development lead across a multi-academy trust. So it was more about strategy and less about practice. For me, I'm super excited that this has come at this time because it means that I can really get kind of to ground with it and start thinking about what I can do in school, because that was one of my frustrations with my role that I absolutely loved was I just want to get in the school and do it. I just want to do this work. I keep talking to people about how to do it and what they should be doing, but I just want to be the person that does it, which is why I looked for a deputy role, because I knew that was where I needed to be. And I think for me, yeah, the impact feels closer, I think, because I will be able to work side by side with those teachers and really have the impact on the ground in the school that I work in, rather than having that sort of top layer of impact that will trickle down. And it would have trickled down, but this is more exciting for me. So yeah, I think it does feel different for me.
Yeah, so interesting. Like you sort of mentioned Jack there. Like I'm going into the role I'm going into. We're actually working in. I'm going to be entering into a collaboration with Jack, with Stable School and stuff. So, which is wonderful for me, like from a support angle, because I'll be drawing on his expertise no end. And he's sort of, my role has changed. So the role I've left has been restructured. So Jack is still a deputy Senko. So he's going to be dealing with continuing to the excellent work he's already done around systems and mechanisms and outreach and stuff. So I think for me, yeah, that there will be a difference in the role that I'm going into, where I'm working with my new current Senko to collaborate with school, with my previous school and with our collaboration. I think it would be remiss of me not to recognise the challenge and the challenges schools face. I think, whilst we acknowledge absolutely 100% is vital that the universal access is strong. We put our excellent routines and expectations in for all children. We make sure it's inclusive practice. We are increasingly seeing again, the paper acknowledges this from a national perspective and from a sort of Kent perspective as well, a dramatic rise in high complex need children, and it's sort of touched. Jen and perhaps touched on it and said, these schools, specialist provisions are still essential, and they are, but more and more children are coming back into the mainstream setting as directed by the government, and as which is putting significant amounts of pressure on schools on the ground. It's putting significant amounts of pressure on teachers and leaders, systems leaders as well, to be able to ensure that we meet the needs of these children. Now, there are just some children, like Chris said, Chris alluded to it, and if a child's in year 3 and they can't read, then no matter what you do in terms of how good your modelling and your checks for understanding and your universal access is, they're not going to be able to do the lesson, right? So what do we do? That's the question that needs answering. That's the bit I feel that we need to put our best efforts on, and was certainly where I'd be putting my best efforts to. Then it's around, right, what are the wider structures and systems for sending your school and your trusts? How can you collaborate? How can you work at economies of scale? How can you maximise resources to ensure that children have those sorts of children that need that really specific provision, which is probably phonics and probably like early maths, number bond, and those principles of counting, all those things that we know are the foundational learning, as we say. That they say, don't they, in the early years, what's the foundational knowledge? They need foundational knowledge, which a teacher simply can't. You should be the best teachers in the world, right? They can't deliver that in a year 3 English lesson, right? They can't do it, because I can't do it. I don't know if you I can't do that, right? Because it's, how can you do it? I'd love to see it, and I'm sure that even in the best practitioners in the world will end up putting something in place, which is what we said, a differentiated holding activity of some sort, which isn't actually an expert teaching them how to read, right? So, and this is like a very difficult question to answer. I don't know, and I haven't got a nice clean answer for you, because if there was one, then we wouldn't be in the situation we're in, right? But we've got to acknowledge that, and we've got to think carefully about how we continue to address that in a bigger sense, and how we create structures within our schools to do that. I know Kite do that very well as well. They have really smart systems to ensure that children get an expert. Those children at that level of need have an expert teacher teaching them what they need to learn. And it's really hard, because there's that inclusivity about being in the classroom, being part of a class, the norms, the culture, the belonging, right? There's a wrestle there. And for me, that's what's going to be different for me in my job, is I'm going to be dealing more directly with that. As a deputy previously, I dealt with it, but and I worked alongside Jack, but now it's really is my issue, like at the top level. So it'll be how I engage with that process. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's something we've really been discussing over the last 5 years in the podcast, isn't it? Because if we think about, like you mentioned Kite, obviously step before that, when Matt was putting the systems in place, and how, we've always talked about how if we make changes now, that's going to see those children who are in reception now go through the school with fewer gaps. That's all, that's got to be the aim, I think. But what do we do? And there are different options, like how we use assembly time, that kind of thing. And it's thinking about what systems can we put in place to ensure that, like you said, we're being really accurate about our diagnosis, and I mean diagnosis in terms of the learning gaps as opposed to the special educational needs. If we could be really, it's not like those kids don't know their number bonds. Well, which number bonds don't they know? Let's teach them those number bonds, and let's be really specific, because that'll give them access to X, Y, and Z. And so our intervention being really forensic, that's a word that we've always come back to. And if we are that sort of, we pay that close attention to detail, then it's not a case of these kids can't do this. It's okay, we're going to help them get there, because then we look at things like, Alex and Rachel talking about scaffolding, and how that scaffolding, like you say, Shannen, doesn't dumb things down. It provides access in the absence of that sort of foundational knowledge, that core knowledge, and because you can learn about the structure of prime numbers without fully knowing your times tables. Obviously, you're aided significantly by knowing that, but you can explore the structure with manipulatives, with the multiplication squares, and looking at patterns and things, and then eventually, once you do know those, then you can tie those pieces together. So that I mean, it's obviously not the answer, but I think if we looked back at the people we've spoken to over the last 5 years, you're probably going to find threads that will be really, really useful, because I know that is the big thing. What do we do for the kids now who have got a 5, 6, 7 year gap with their peers? Because the changes we make now are going to be making sure that doesn't manifest over time. So I don't know, but I do think we've been discussing it, and I think I'm going to look back and see.